Saluton from BA. This is a Rorschach Multilateral update from the 11th of March 2025. A summary of what's going down in the world's major multilateral institutions. Our first story concerns the Middle East. The International Organization for Migration announced on Friday the 7th that almost 800,000 displaced Syrians have gone back to their hometowns since last November. Still, about 7 million people are still displaced within the country. The organization also noted that about a quarter of those who returned are living in damaged or unfinished buildings. This trend follows the fall of the Assad regime late last year, which led to a significant drop in internal displacement and an increase in returns from abroad. Next up, in the United States on Thursday the 6th, Trump's administration rejected the United Nations 2030 Sustainability Agenda, calling it a threat to U.S. sovereignty and not aligned with American interests. Officials said the plan undermines the nation's economic independence and pushes policies that could harm the American way of life. Recall that Trump has opposed domestic and global efforts to mitigate the effects of climate change, including multilateral initiatives to promote sustainability. Speaking of the U.S., on Friday the 7th, the World Trade Organization's head called for global trade partners to listen to the U.S. concerns about tariffs rather than retaliate with similar measures. The Director General stressed the importance of dialogue concerning the recent tariff threats. She noted that even though Trump's trade wars with countries such as China, Canada, and Mexico have caused disruptions, much of global trade continues unaffected. Recently, Trump announced tariffs against these nations, though he reversed certain tariffs shortly after introducing them. In related news, on Thursday the 6th, Trump cast doubt on the U.S.'s commitment to defend NATO allies, signaling that the U.S. may not come to their aid unless they meet defense spending goals. He has repeatedly called for NATO members, especially in Europe, to spend more on their military, threatening that failure to do so could lead to the U.S. to reassess its support. Trump has previously criticized NATO countries for not spending enough money on defense, but it is odd for him to explicitly say he would not come to the aid of an ally in the event of a military attack. On that note about defense spending, on Thursday the 6th, EU leaders backed more defense spending and reaffirmed their commitment to Ukraine's defense. At a summit in Brussels, they agreed to increase defense budgets, focusing on boosting Europe's military autonomy. The decision was in response to the United States pulling back military aid to Ukraine and generally engaging less with its allies constructively. Saturday the 8th marked International Women's Day. The African Union celebrated the day with an event focused on empowering African women and promoting economic and social change. It featured discussions on international trade, financial empowerment, mental health, technology, innovation, and leadership. Participants shared strategies to tackle challenges in education, healthcare, technology, and economic inclusion, aiming to foster sustainable development and innovation across Africa. Similarly, on Friday the 7th, Canada signed an agreement with the Organization of American States, or OAS, aiming to prevent, punish, and eliminate violence against women across the Americas. The agreement reinforces legal frameworks and cooperation across the region to combat violence and ensure the protection of women's rights, and is a key tool for promoting justice and eliminating gender-based violence throughout the member states. The OAS sometimes participates in international collaborations like this one to address other challenges, which can include election monitoring and economic development. Typically, countries give different kinds of support to these collaborations, including funding and technical expertise. Additionally, the organization engages with external nations through observer status, which lets them participate despite not being a member. On Monday the 3rd, Yuji Iwasawa, a Japanese judge, was elected as the new president of the International Court of Justice, or ICJ. Iwasawa, who has served on the same court since 2018, previously taught international law at the University of Tokyo and chaired the United Nations Human Rights Committee. He is the second Japanese judge to hold the ICJ presidency and will be in office until 2027. On the same day that Iwasawa was elected, Japan's Ministry of Foreign Affairs put out a statement praising and highlighting the importance of the rule of law in international affairs. Meanwhile, on Tuesday the 4th, Vietnam's Prime Minister held a dialogue with business leaders in Hanoi from the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, or ASEAN. They discussed boosting investment in key sectors like technology, energy, and agriculture to help Vietnam achieve substantial economic growth this year. ASEAN businesses expressed support but called for improvements in Vietnam's legal framework, tax transparency, and investments licensing. The Prime Minister pledged to address their concerns and emphasize strengthening regional cooperation to create a more connected and effective ASEAN. In health news, on Wednesday the 5th, the World Health Organization warned of a possible rise in tuberculosis cases due to cuts in the U.S. foreign aid. The funding reduction could disrupt vital tuberculosis programs in countries with the highest infection rates, especially in regions like Africa and Southeast Asia. Tuberculosis is a major global health challenge, particularly in low-income countries with limited access to medical care. International aid efforts have historically helped to curb the disease's impact through widespread vaccination programs, improved diagnostics, and access to life-saving medications. These initiatives have significantly reduced the transmission and lethality of the disease. The cuts to U.S. foreign aid threaten critical services beyond just tuberculosis care, including drug supply chains and health care staffing, which could lead to a significant increase in cases and deaths of this disease and others. Health experts fear that this setback could undo years of progress in the global fight against disease in general. According to a report from the Food and Agriculture Organization released on Friday the 7th, global food prices went up in February, driven by increases in sugar, dairy, and vegetable oil costs. Sugar prices saw a sharp 7% jump due to expected shortages and poor weather in Brazil, where much of the sugar is produced. Dairy prices also climbed by 4%, fueled by strong demand and limited production. Vegetable oil rose by 2% as tight supplies and high biodiesel demand pushed prices higher. In UN updates, on Wednesday the 5th, the head of the organization's human rights arm highlighted that violent crimes during Bangladesh's uprising last year, including murder, could be prosecuted at the International Criminal Court. He stressed the importance of accountability for Bangladesh's progress and suggested that international law could play a role alongside domestic efforts. The UN's report, based on an investigation, pointed to serious violations committed by government officials and security forces. The UN called for victim support, including reparation programs and rehabilitation care. To close out this week, on Saturday the 8th, the head of the International Monetary Fund, or IMF, indicated that Sri Lanka's economy is stabilizing, despite challenges, and offered further assistance. While the country faced severe economic crises in recent years, including high inflation and debt, IMF support has helped stabilize its situation. The IMF's continued backing aims to strengthen Sri Lanka's recovery, ensuring vital reforms and financial management. This marks progress towards long-term economic stability as the nation works to manage its debts and support its population. The IMF typically helps countries like Sri Lanka with bailout plans and adjustment programs to aid the country in managing its debt, stabilizing its currency, and getting economic reforms off the ground. These programs often come with conditions such as policy changes. And that's it for this week. Thank you for joining us. If you have any feedback, send us an email at info@rorschach.com. We want to make our updates better for you. See you next week!